Okay, I'm John Wertz, Studying Committee Chair, Montgomery County Tea Party, and we're visiting with Steve Toth tonight on the Congressional District 8 seat. Joining me is Pat Tibbs, Dennis Tibbs, Brian Crumby, Dell Fessenden, Bob Bagley, and Larry Rogers. And at this point, we'll turn it over to Steve for his up to 5-minute opening.
You bet. So I'd like to thank you for being here tonight and giving me the opportunity to share my thoughts regarding Congressional District 8. So it was May 29th, 2012. We were at Trattoria celebrating the victory, an upset victory of Rob Eisler in House District 15. And on my way home, I got a call from a San Antonio newspaper. And this woman said to me, "Congratulations on your primary victory over Representative Eisler. We have one question, and that is, will you make a commitment to end the gridlock in Austin?" And I said, "What gridlock? There's gridlock, really?" She goes, "Absolutely, Mr. Toth. You don't know that there's gridlock in Austin and Washington?" And I said, "Ma'am," I said, "I think the politicians in both parties would like for us to believe that there's gridlock in Austin, in Washington, because they want us to believe that they're actually fighting one another, when the reality is they're not fighting one another. In finance, there's the rule of 72, which a multiple, any two numbers that you can multiply that equals 72 will cause a 100% increase in the sum. So if you take the existing federal budget, which right now is growing at 8% a year, in a 9-year period, 8 times 9 is 72, in a 9-year period, that budget will rise 100%. That's the spending increase that's occurring in Washington right now. And the Republicans want you to believe that they're fighting on behalf of you and me to keep things, to keep spending down, when the reality is that they're not. The Republicans and Democrats are working just fine together. And I want to go to Washington because I want to stop it. I want to stop the Republicans from reaching across the aisle to Democrats that no longer consider it a pejorative to be called a socialist. The Democrat Party has moved so far to the left, there's nothing to reach across the aisle to anymore. We as a Republican Party need to come together, and we need to solve our problems, not with the Democrats.
Okay, thanks very much. Okay, so this is the point where we go around the table. Actually got a question from Ken. It is lengthy, so bear with me. It is in regards to the budget. Our national debt is at a post-World War II high of nearly 105% and is projected to grow to surpass the World War II debt. If we keep military spending at its current post-World War II low and completely eliminate all other discretionary spending, i.e. no more federal prisons been built, no electricity for the White House, that's not a bad idea, no ambassadors, etc., our total spending would be 18.5% of GDP. With the retirement of the baby boomers, this is projected to grow to 21% within a decade, assuming no war or recession. The government has never been able to raise more than 18.5% of GDP under any tax policy. At the same time, you have proposed a 10% flat tax while retaining two major deductions, which would be the charitable donations and the mortgage deductions. This sounds like it would significantly decrease revenues and further increase deficits. How do you propose to balance the budget, or do you believe it is morally acceptable to leave our children with a debt larger than the World War II generation acquired? And are you prepared to slash entitlement spending, Medicare and Social Security, by more than 25%?
All that just doing.
Took 2 minutes to read it.
So
Yeah.
one of the big issues that's left out here, that you said Medicare and Social Security, the big bugaboo is Medicaid. That's the 800-pound gorilla. And if the United States would leave Medicaid and send it back to the states in a block grant, the states could use it more efficiently. We could send them actually less money without coercive strings, as it's been referred to by the Supreme Court. And that would not only put the states in better shape financially. Right now, the state of Texas will spend more money next session on Medicaid than it does on education. The big drivers for any state are education, medication, incarceration, and transportation. And Medicaid was only 3% of the budget for Texas 18 years ago. Today it's nearly 22%. We'll spend more on Medicaid in Texas than we do educating our children. A big driver of that is the fact that we're not sealing our borders. There are a lot of things that we can do to shore up the budget that just starts with fiscal sanity and closing our borders. But the other part of this is that in lowering the tax rate, it will spur economic activity. Many of you have heard that Pfizer, the United States, just lost one of its biggest drug companies. There was a reverse buyout with an Irish company. Pfizer is now moving to Ireland. Why? Because it has a favorable tax policy. We have the highest Western corporate tax in the world, and it's killing us. It is driving companies, it's driving jobs overseas.
Okay, thank you. All right, Pat.
If we were attacked again today in the same manner we were on 9/11, what should our response be, if anything, and what would we do different than we did before?
I think the thing that we need to ask ourselves and consider in this issue that we have today with fundamentalist Islam, and I'm not referring to it as radical Islam, it's fundamentalist Islam. You see about every 100 years, you see a resurgence, you see a revival among Islam, where they return to their Islamic true fundamentalism. This is not radical, this is what Sharia law, this is what the 8 hadiths of Sunni Islam and the 6 hadiths of Shia Islam teach. It's violent and it's evil. And I think what we need to come to grips with is the fact that you can refer to different denominations of Islam. It started with Al-Qaeda, right? And then it was just a few years ago that the quote-unquote JV team swore allegiance to them. ISIS swore allegiance to them. And we could go and we could knock out ISIS. Now Boko Haram has sworn allegiance to them. And we'll wipe out ISIS, and then Boko Haram will come along. What this is going to take is a 50-year strategy, maybe a 100-year strategy. But I don't think it begins with putting 100,000 ground troops in the Middle East. We'll be there for the rest of our lives, and we will bankrupt America in the process. Sun Tzu, in The Art of War, said, the greatest way to destroy a country is to take your troops and place them in your enemy's far distant land, because it will bankrupt you before you ever win the campaign. What we need to do is we need to support friendly nations over there with air power and quick response special forces. They can help them. We cannot do it by putting another 100,000 ground troops over there, though.
Yes.
Okay, in regards to our tax system, why do you favor the flat tax over the fair tax? And if you were to do the flat tax, why bother keeping any deductions? Why not just get rid of all of them?
I think Dennis, the biggest problem with the fair tax is you actually have to start with a sense of trust in your federal government that they actually will do away with the income tax, right? The whole idea with a fair tax is that it's a consumption tax, and you're trusting that the federal government will institute a brand new tax and then will eliminate an old tax. Government has never met a tax they didn't like. And if you give them a new tax, they will take it. They will take it and they will never do away with the old one. The income tax, when it started, was supposed to be a short-term thing of 2%. It was supposed to be 2% across the board. It was supposed to be a flat tax. It would just be here for a few years and it would go away. I don't believe that it will ever go away. And that's my issue with a consumption tax like this. Now, this has also been tried a few years ago. Remember the luxury tax? Do y'all remember that? It drove hundreds of thousands of jobs overseas. We lost the yachting industry. We lost an industry that makes mobile homes. We lost another industry that created aircraft. We lost aircraft manufacturers. People will buy these expensive items overseas, and we will lose those jobs. So I have two issues with it. One is it's going to cost us a lot of jobs, and number two is I don't believe that the feds will ever walk away from a tax. I just don't trust our government.
Well, could we get rid of all deductions?
I don't think it's a good idea to do away with charitable deductions, and I don't think it's a good idea to do away with the home deduction. The home deduction, the problem with it is that
But it does reward people who maintain debt.
it does reward people that maintain debt, but at the end of the day too, home sales are what drives our economy. And so if that in any way influences the purchase of a home or helps a young family starting out, then I don't want to see us do it.
So question number 4 has to do with Iran getting nuclear capabilities, and question number 6 has to do with fundamentals. So you I get the impression that you think if Iran gets nuclear stuff, we should go pound them. What am I reading you right? And if that, what is the basis of the justification for us to do it from a authority standpoint? Who made us the police of the world? Maybe
Yeah.
that's the question.
Adolf Hitler, I think, proved to the world that if your enemy writes a book or tells you that they're going to come and destroy you, try and destroy you, you should listen to them. And Iran has said over and over again that they want to destroy the United States and they want to destroy Israel. The very fact that Iran has nuclear weapons is causing an arms race, a nuclear arms race in the Middle East right now. The Middle East is made up of 85% Sunnis, 15% Shias. And now you have Shia Iran with a bomb. And now the Egyptians, the Saudi Arabians, all want nuclear weapons as well, because they would rather trust the Jews with a bomb than the Shias with a bomb. It's amazing. So we're looking at a completely destabilized Middle East by allowing Iran to have the bomb. And they will use it. They will use it because they believe that it will usher in the 12th Imam. They believe that this is a form of end times prophecy that they're called to follow. And I do believe that there's a place for preemptively striking with a bomb buster and taking that facility out.
But that's different than, and that's different than air power pounding them. Right?
No, well, air power would be, that was in response to Pat's question, I guess, if there was a 9/11, is that what you asked?
Okay, yeah, okay.
Right?
That was the answer, yeah.
But that was the question too, about what to
Right,
do
you're
if they
right.
have the bomb.
Okay.
Okay. What is the government's proper role in healthcare? What plan approach do you favor or propose?
I support a free market approach. George Bush said that if we would just elect him, he would allow us, small businesses, to buy health insurance across state lines. He ran 2 different times and said he would do this. He had both the House and the Senate, and not one time did one single Republican ever propose any legislation that would make it legal for small businesses and individuals to purchase health insurance across state lines. So the one and only thing that I favor is that the federal government would get out of the picture. My company, we were told, if you like your doctor, you can keep your doctor, and if you like your plan, you can keep your plan. We lost our plan. My company is an outlier in our industry in that we actually provided health insurance to our employees. And thanks to Barack Obama and Obamacare, we lost that coverage. Now those guys have to go to the open market by themselves because it's now just too affordable. The government, anything they touch, they screw up. So the only thing I would like to see by the government is for them to stay out of it and let the free market do its thing. I can remember my brother broke his ankle when I was in high school. It was around 1972. He was playing hockey, took a slap shot to the ankle and broke his ankle. My dad, took him to the hospital, pulled out his checkbook and cut a check for $175 for Lance's cast. You could afford it in those days. Why? Because there was no such thing as insurance. The free market, if we allow it to take its place, I think it will work wonders.
I saw it on here a minute ago. What's the proper relationship between the United States and the United Nations?
That's a trick question. So I don't believe that I don't believe that the United Nations honestly serves any purpose other than to advance communism. You look at everything that the free market stands for and all the good that capitalism has done around the world, and the United Nations is doing everything they can to hinder it. To suggest that Muammar Gaddafi in Libya at one point should be on an equal rights commission, which is where the United Nations placed them, is ridiculous. Or to suggest that we should in some way be penalized for all the good things that we have done because of our CO2 emissions when we produce fewer CO2 emissions than China does. The United Nations has become a big stick for little FUD countries. And I don't see what purpose they honestly serve anymore.
So would you be willing to defund them?
Yes, 100%.
What about kicking them out of the U.S.?
I would love to see us kick the United Nations to the curb.
What are the realistic possibilities of that happening?
I think that it would take a lot of courage on the part of our president to do that. The Constitution gives the commander-in-chief a lot of leeway. It doesn't give the Congress the leeway to start those. It's really an issue of the Senate and the presidency to start that. But we as leaders need to start that discussion, and we need to educate the people of the United States about what the United Nations is and is not doing, and all that they're doing to try and hurt our country.
Congress does have the purse strings, though. Can stop all the
Right, but-
funding.
Right, but I believe it would take a treaty between the executive branch and the Senate to start that. But yes, Bob, I mean, to answer your question, I support defunding it completely.
Okay, looking back over the years that we've known you, and then prior to that, you apparently have been a successful business person, and you were successful in winning your house seat in Austin. Give us a real overview of really, why do you want to go to Washington?
Kevin Brady, when he went to Washington 18 years ago, said he would only serve for 12 years. That was 18 years ago. And now he's making a commitment to Washington to be there for another 6 years. So in other words, 24 years. And when he said he'd only serve 12 years, he said that because he told the people of Congressional District 8 that people become part of the problem. And he would self-term limit because people become part of the problem. And Kevin Brady has become part of our problem. And we are one of the most conservative congressional districts in one of the most conservative states in the entire nation. And we have an individual that talks about fighting for us, goes to Washington, rolls over, and plays dead. The only thing that Kevin has advanced in the 18 years that he has been there is his own career. He's not passed one piece of legislation. He told us that give us the Congress and the Senate and we will defund Obamacare. And what did he do? He funded it. And this is just typical of what Kevin does. It was in August that he sent out an email to all of us saying, isn't it awful that Planned Parenthood is being funded while they're selling baby parts? shouldn't we defund Obamacare, or shouldn't we defund Planned Parenthood? And everyone says, yes, Kevin, way to go. What does he do? He funds it. Kevin hasn't shown us anything that he's willing to go to the wall on for the people of Congressional District 8. And he takes an attitude that says, I hear what you're saying, but I know better. And that's antithetical to the Constitution, it's antithetical to representative form of governance. And I'm going to change that.
Yeah, I'd like to give you the opportunity to tell us how long you'll serve.
12 years, at the very most.
Okay. Question 19. The question was, what have you done or will commit to do to reduce federal spending? Where specifically do the cuts need to be made? You mentioned in there, I will fight for a balanced budget amendment that springs from zero-based budgeting and the elimination of 6 agencies. Which 6 and why?
Can't remember if we put this in here. The Department of Commerce is one of them. I'm going to write it down as I do this.
Yep, that's fine.
The Department of Education. I'd also really believe that the EPA is a department that we can at the very least curtail and cut way back. The EPA is being used now to weaponize. It's funny, it's been used now to, they're saying that the lead that from a bullet is in some way causing the deterioration of our climate. Therefore, we need to do away with it. So, anyways, yes, the EPA. One of the newest, you're all familiar with Dodd-Frank, right? A provision within Dodd-Frank is the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. This is a brand new bureau that will come online in 2016. The bureau is weaponized in some regards. It's like the FBI, but it's the FBI for financial institutions. They have the ability to walk into a financial institution, bank, lending company, with a gun and take records with no warrant whatsoever. And many people aren't even aware of it. And it's going to make it very difficult for banks and lending institutions to do business with small businesses. And it should absolutely, positively be done away with. I'd also like to do away with the IRS. The Internal Revenue Service, I think by doing this with a flat tax of 10% is a smart way to go. And this is something that Ted Cruz has suggested, if you use a 3x5 card and you send it in, honestly, there's no reason why you need the IRS to the extent that to the role that it plays today in America. So I would like to see us do away with the Internal Revenue Service. I'd also like to see us take the Bureau of Land Management and see that done away with. I think that we need to work hard at making sure that, and I don't understand what the need is for the federal government to own land. I think the states can control their own property. They should control their own property. The Constitution states that the only purpose the federal government should play is the common defense for the states. And so I'd like to see land management turned over to the states. One of the biggest state parks in the nation is the Adirondack State Park in New York. The federal government doesn't need to run that, and there's absolutely no reason why the federal government should run any parks in the United States. Let the states take care of it. Decrease the size of government. We should get out of the postal business. There's absolutely no reason why we should run a postal business for the United States anymore. They continue to lose money every single year. We should get out of the train business. Amtrak should go away. There's absolutely no reason why we should do it. If there's a role for trains in America, let the private sector do it. So there are a lot of government agencies that could be trimmed or completely eliminated. But it's going to take a real commitment and a vision on the part of the next leadership of Congress to get after it. So right now, as an example, just in the whole train area, that's a huge issue for the state of Texas as we're considering high-speed rail, and many of us are fighting that. Kevin Brady, since 1993, has authored legislation supporting high-speed rail in the state of Texas. And this past year authorized another $7.2 billion, which is one of the reasons why Heritage Alliance gave them such a low score, to authorize the construction of high-speed rail in America. This is an affront to all that we hold dear as far as taking land away from us through eminent domain. It just needs to stop.
Okay, thanks, Pat.
There have been more than several mass shootings in recent, now we can say months. What, if anything, should the federal government do to solve this problem?
If you want to stop mass shootings, hardened targets are the best way to stop mass shootings. Soft targets where people are defenseless invite mass shootings. I understand that we have a problem with mental health in the United States. I also understand that we have a problem with not sending people away to jail and keeping them there, violent criminals. As an example, I grew up in Webster, New York, or I grew up in Fairport, New York. Just north of me is Webster, New York, where a man in his 20s beat his mom to death with a hammer. He beat her so badly that the coroners could not identify who she was. He was sent away to jail for 15 years, and the state of New York let him out. And it was in January of 2013 that he purchased a couple rifles through a straw purchase. He set his house on fire after he killed his sister, waited for the firemen to show up, and he started shooting them. Shot 3 or 4 of them dead. That animal never should have been let out of jail. And yet we continue to let violent offenders out while locking non-violent offenders up. It doesn't make any sense.
Okay. In our country, we don't have 2 or 3 problems this year and 2 or 3 problems next year and 2 or 3 problems the following year. We have the same old problems that just keep adding up. Social Security could have been fixed 30 years ago. IRS could have been fixed 30 years ago. Everybody that campaigns says they're gonna fix it. They go to Washington or Austin, and we wait and wait and wait and wait and wait. So which of those issues or other issues are a priority, and how long are we gonna have to wait till we see some action, either a bill or a co-sponsor or something from you?
The last thing that I want to do is author legislation for the sake of authoring legislation. And under the current representation, we have someone that comes back to town hall meetings and talks about all the legislation that he's authored, while he hasn't passed one single bill. We had nearly 13 pieces of legislation that we passed either as a House bill, a Senate sponsored bill, or as amendments. And that's a lot of work. It's a lot of hard work. What we did was, in the 83rd session, is we basically took all of our bills and we turned them into amendments, knowing full well that Joe Strauss would try and stymie us because he wouldn't let any of my legislation out of committees. So we just took them and turned them into amendments, and we looked for every possible bill that we could tack them onto. You don't get to have the bill signing thing with the governor. You don't get your picture taken. You don't get your name in the paper, but it still has the same force of law. So, Dennis, to answer your question, I'd like to work with some other members that have more seniority and help them on a piece of legislation that includes saving Social Security. It's going to take a lot of hard work on the part of a lot of senior members. The only way to fix Social Security at this point, and not necessarily Social Security so much as it is the only way to ensure the retirements for millions and millions of Americans, is to allow them to take their retirement into their own hands, I believe, and do something with it. It was in 1985, I went to one of my first town hall meetings in New York, upstate New York, with Louise Slaughter. And she was the author of Pass and Deem when they were trying to pass Obamacare without a vote. And my question to her was, I said, how do I deal with the fact that I'm 24 years old and I'm never going to see Social Security by the time I'm 65? And she said, well, oh, bless your heart, who told you that? we're gonna take care of Social Security. Yes, we will. Have they? No, they have not. They have not. Social Security is worse off than it ever was. We get Band-Aid fixes to it about every 5 or 10 years when we complain about it. But the reality is that it's not fixed. It's a train wreck. And if you add all the things together, all the deficits together, including the current deficit and unfunded mandates, our debt is nearly $140 trillion. So I can't give you an easy fix for how to fix Social Security other than the fact that it's probably going to need to be means tested, and we're going to also have to prolong the retirement age for some folks as well.
But almost everybody agrees that that's okay, but it never gets done.
Correct. Correct. And I want to do something about it.
Well, I've already got mine.
All of it?
Maybe.
Yeah.
That's the tricky part.
Yeah,
Okay.
you're still in the right side of the grass.
So what made you want to run in this race? And what's going to prevent you from being corrupted by the system?
I think it's several things in my life. It's I walk with accountability. I walk with individuals that hold me accountable, and I've shown an unwillingness when I was in the Texas legislature to bend and to take money from unscrupulous people. I just wouldn't do it, and I didn't do it. And I very early in Austin, in fact, before I got sworn in, when I came out of the AT&T Center at for freshman orientation, they said, representatives to be, there is a lunch outside and there's some folks out there that have some things for you. So we went out there to get our box lunches, and sure enough, there were a line of lobbyists, and they had envelopes with our names on them. And a check for your campaign, which is very welcome because you've just depleted it. And it might be $250 or $500 or $1,000 for your campaign. Well, this one lobbyist, the check was $3,500. It was absolutely by far the biggest check that any of the freshmen would get. And I looked at who it was from, and I said, I'm not going to take it. And he said, why? Why? And I said, I don't agree with what your issue is, and so you can hold on to it. Babette knows the story, and I've told you guys, most of y'all, about the story. But I said, no, I'm not going to take the check. And what it did was it set off a firestorm that they'd actually have someone that would not take their check. I was the only one out of 41 freshmen. It was the biggest freshman class since Sharpstown, the Sharpstown scandal. And I was the only one that would not take the check. And that set me at odds with the lobbyists, with the lobby, which rightly so Ted Cruz calls the cartel. Washington has the cartel, Austin has the cartel. And you need to make enemies with them very quickly, Brian, to answer your question, if you want to keep from getting swayed.
Okay, question number 2, you talk about the 10th Amendment nullification and so forth, and you say state laws that nullify unconstitutional federal laws. I think the sticky wicket is who defines what unconstitutional means. How do you define that? Who determines what is unconstitutional? Because you get various opinions from various courts who are supposedly the authorities, et cetera, et cetera. I think that's the sticky wicket, and tie that in with any discussion of the supremacy clause.
So, the Founding Fathers really left that up to the states. Today, if a state wants to go and lose authority, the place you go to is the federal court. Why? Because you go to the federal court, and the federal courts say, we don't want to give up any power. We want more power. We want more authority. We want more control, right? That's the foolishness of man that our founding fathers talked about when they said, we need this Constitution to bind men down and to chain them from their foolishness. our founding fathers saw that, and they knew that, and they knew that the courts were the wrong place to go with it, which is why they said the power left to the states is boundless. The powers left to the federal government are few and defined. So it's incumbent upon the states, I believe, for the states to determine whether something is in fact constitutional. Now, as far as the supremacy clause, I believe the supremacy clause is supreme as it relates to the federal government acting within the constraints that the Constitution has allowed them to act within. The problem today, though, is that we've got the federal government overstepping every boundary, and you have courts that don't believe that there's any purpose for the 10th Amendment anymore. They believe it's a passé clause in the Constitution that should not be followed anymore. And if we continue to believe that, we will continue to be subject to these ridiculous federal laws. Now, we can see interposition and nullification all over the United States today. You just have to go out to California, right? California interposes federal law. Interposition is the activity of a state just ignoring federal law. Well, they're doing that in regard to immigration, right? 340 sanctuary cities around the United States are interposing federal law. They're just absolutely ignoring it. Colorado, Oregon, they're nullifying federal law, right? They've passed legislation that works in defiance of federal drug laws. So tell me something. If the Democrats can do it, why can't we? We've been invited to a gunfight, and we showed up with a butter knife. We're expecting the courts to do the right thing when we have a federal government that is interposing and nullifying. I mean, right now, Barack Obama is nullifying federal law through his executive orders. Law that is passed through the legislative process and it's signed into law, he is nullifying through executive order. It's totally unconstitutional.
Okay, thank you. We're closing in on about 10 minutes. We got about 12, 13 minutes before we close in.
Illegal immigration. There's talk about putting a fence up, securing our borders. Federal government hasn't done any part of that. Our congressman currently hasn't done anything to help us out in the state of Texas. Is it important for us to build a fence, or would it be better for us to stop all of the freebies both the state and the federal government give to all the illegals and take away the incentives for them to be here?
All the above. We got to stop the magnet, but we have to finish the wall. If you fly over, I've flown over the border several times with Texas Rangers and Texas DPS, and we have the wall in many places. The problem is that this is again a function of the federal government. The federal government sets up all of this protected federal land that's right on the border. They don't allow Texas DPS to drive trucks, cars, motorcycles, anything on it because it's federal land. Do you think the drug cartel is obeying that?
No.
Of course not. Of course they're not. So we're not only battling the cartel, we're battling the federal government in the process. And what I believe that we should do is, yes, you end the magnet by taking away the incentives that bring people here illegally. You also build the wall, but we can do something above and beyond that. More veterans hail from Texas than any other state. In fact, 45% of our Marines are from Texas. And when these guys come back from the Middle East, as soon as they get off the plane, they lose their job, they lose a sense of mission, purpose, and unit cohesion as soon as they get off the plane. We wonder why these guys struggle with post-traumatic stress after all that they've been put through. Why not take them, put them in the Texas State Guard, deploy them on the border, they've got a job, they can be on the border for a month, they can come home for a month. Back on the border for a month, home for a month. During that time we can triage them, find out how they're doing, find out how they're reintegrating, find out if they're able to find work in the future while they're securing our border. We need boots on the ground, we need a wall, and we need to stop the magnet.
In business, if a new management comes in or a new owner comes in and looks at a business that they've obtained, one of the first things they do is to see how efficient each department is running. And over the years, we hear all kinds of candidates saying, yeah, man, federal government's so inefficient. I'm gonna do something about it when I get there. And you hear it over and over and over again, but every department in the federal government is totally inefficient. I mean, I've spent hours on the phone with the IRS, and you'll get one notice from one left hand from the IRS, and you get a different notice from the right hand, and they don't even correlate. So there is a great amount of inefficiency. How can you get over, how can you make something happen and get things efficient?
At the federal level, I think it's, first off, it's gonna take the president's leadership, and whether it's a Donald Trump or a Ted Cruz that wins this thing, I think both of them have the fire in their bellies to turn things upside down. And I would gladly be a wrecking ball in the Congress to help them. The problem we have right now is that there is so much money to maintain the status quo. That's the problem. The status quo is our biggest enemy. And the Washington cartel does not want to see efficiency, because efficiency means less money and less spending. If you can bring efficiency to the post office, as an example, it's going to mean you can bring efficiency to the Department of Defense, where a lot of money is spent and wasted. They don't want to see efficiency brought to Washington, just like they don't want to see didn't want to see efficiency brought to Austin, Texas. So it's going to take people that are willing to fight against the Washington cartel and call it what it is. K Street is a cancer for America. And the problem is that you've got too many people like Kevin Brady that have been on the dole for too long to the Washington cartel and have been unwilling to call a spade a spade.
Just a few seconds left. What is your opinion of Kevin Brady becoming the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee in regard to helping his election?
I don't think it'll have any effect. I think the average person really couldn't care less that he got that position. He's been there for 18 years and he hasn't done anything for us other than vote with Sheila Jackson Lee more than he's voted with Louis Gohmert.
Well, that kind of leads right into my next question. So I know who you probably don't most identify with in the Congress. Who would you most identify
Yeah,
with in the current Congress?
I have a lot of respect for Louis and the way he stood strong, and a lot of respect for Ted Cruz and the way he stood strong in the Senate, and Mike Lee, the way he has stood strong. And Justin Amish, these guys are great guys that are taking an enormous amount of backlash. I had the opportunity of speaking with Alan West at a fundraiser just a couple of weeks ago, and he said, if you win, here's what you've got to expect: that the abuse that you get from the Republicans and Republican leadership will far surpass anything you get from the Democrats. And I said, it's what I expected. It's what I had in Austin. The nastiest people there were Republican leadership there in Austin. It will be the same way in Washington. I'm ready for it.
Okay, we still have a little bit of time left. Who do you believe has been the best Supreme Court justice in the past 50 years, and the worst, and why?
Antonin Scalia, best. And this will be hard to say, but I hate to say it, but I'm going to say Roberts has been the worst. And the reason why is that he created law out of no law. I have never seen, when Obamacare came before the Supreme Court, neither side argued that it's a tax. It wasn't part of the argument. Yet to save Obamacare, Justice Roberts said, it's a tax. Talk about creating law out of thin air. It's ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous. I can't think of a time when, to save a piece of legislation, he's had to pull something out of thin air. It's ridiculous. So I absolutely think he is one of the worst that has ever, he's absolutely the worst head justice.
You know, Kevin brags about the fact that he never moved to Washington DC. So is that a good thing or a bad thing, and what's your plan regarding that?
I think it's a great thing that he didn't move there.
Would
The
you
problem
rather
is that he lost touch with us. And so it doesn't matter if your physical presence, if you put your head on your pillow Saturday and Sunday here in the Woodlands or here in Montgomery County or here back in Congressional District 8, the reality is that the problem is that if you're listening to the people and lobbyists of Washington more than you're listening to your constituents, then you don't represent them. What good is it to come back here and brag about the fact that you don't represent us, but you feel that you're going to do what's best for us rather than listen to us? It's ridiculous.
Well, Kevin, I guess always brags that he votes for the best bad bit. I mean, if we send you there, some of us are from the party of no. If there's not a good bill there, it ought to be voted down.
So Denny Hastert, when he was Speaker of the House, he had the Hastert rule. And the Hastert rule is that if we've got a majority, which the Republicans had, he said, I will look for a majority within my own party before I'll reach across the aisle to the Democrats. That we as a Republican Party need to come together, conservatives and moderates need to come together and find a solution, and then we reach across the aisle. Boehner and Brady are doing the exact opposite. They reach across the aisle and find out what's acceptable to them, to the president, that won't cause a shutdown, and they bring as few votes with them as possible. And this two-year budget deal is an example that practically gives this president a blank check. You had 79 Republicans, that's it. 79 Republicans, it's less than a third of the Republican caucus joined with every single Democrat to do this terrible two-year budget deal. Over 2/3, all the conservatives and all the moderates voted against it. It was so bad. That's ridiculous.
I think Kevin Brady voted.
He voted with the Democrats.
So what,
Probably the last question. We've got 5 minutes. Brian.
so what can government do more efficient or better than the private sector?
Kill people and break things. That's the purpose of war. Our Defense Department is not a social justice experiment. It's there to defend us. It's there to provide for the common defense. And it's something that America does probably better than anybody. I think we've got the strongest fighting force in the world. And it's all that the government is really, truly good at. I can't think of anything that they've touched that they've improved. Certainly not the postage system, certainly not healthcare, certainly not transportation, definitely not education. There's nothing that they do well.
Okay,
Quickly.
you're no boots on the ground in the Middle East.
I didn't say no boots. So what I was implying was special forces,
Okay.
Force Recon Marines, but definitely not 50 to 100,000 people there for another 50 years.
Okay. The essential question I'm trying to get to is what credible military authorities support that type of a plan?
I don't know that, I've heard multiple candidates talk about it, and I've also heard multiple military people talk about wanting to get into a ground war over in the Middle East. And if you support the idea of a 50-year ground war, then you should do that. I just don't personally think that that is a great idea.
Well, the key is, what's it going to take for victory?
What is victory? Is it defeating ISIS or is it defeating fundamentalist Islam? If it's to defeat fundamentalist Islam, we will be there for 50 to 100 years by virtue of the fact that there are 200+ million of them over there. Are you going to kill 200 million people in the next 10 or 15 years? And the reality is that no, you're not. So we can eliminate ISIS. I grant you that. We can go over there, we can put troops on the ground right now and kill ISIS. Will that stop this problem? And it won't, because the reality is that we will still be fighting fundamentalist Islam in the Middle East. We can be over there for the next 50 to 75 years. So again, I think what we do is we bleed them. We cut them, we make it hurt. When you put, if you've got a front lawn, you put grub killer down. It's called grub control. You can't kill 100% of the grubs in your lawn. You'll kill 80% of them. And I think we've got to look at our fight against fundamentalist Islam the same way. We go over there, we contain them, we keep them out of our country, and we bleed them through quick strike forces and special operations. They keep them off guard and on the defensive.
One more question, and then I can lead into your closing, and this may lead into your closing. When you leave office, what accomplishment do you want to be your hallmark, your legacy, and why?
Right now, Congress is at an all-time distrust with the American people. And especially in Congressional District 8, where we have had promise after promise after promise after promise. And Kevin Brady's not followed through on any of them. When I went to the Texas House, I said I would begin a fight against C-Scope, and I passed the C-Scope transparency bill, and we did it. I said I was pro-life, and I worked hard during 2 special sessions to make sure that SB 5 and what eventually was House Bill 2 got passed. And so the promise I'm going to make is that I'm going to make do everything I can do when I put forth a promise to follow it, to follow through on it. If there's one simple thing that I want to see happen is I want to restore trust, that there's still good people that are going to do what they say they're going to do and follow through on it. If you don't trust your government at all and your elected officials, it just builds synergy. It just builds, what's the right word? Cynicism among voters. And it's one of the reasons why so few people vote. They don't believe that elected officials listen or care anymore. So, John, to answer your question, if there's one thing I'd like to do, I'd love to see trust restored to our elected officials, that good people are willing to step up and serve and fight for them.
Okay? If you want to take a couple more minutes in closing?
I'd love the opportunity to represent you in Washington for Congressional District 8 when